like this, man. It's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all time.
All right, Aaron, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much for having me.
I mean, honestly, your audio sounds remarkably clear, considering you've had your soul imprisoned in crystal for 10,000 years,
and it was richly deserved.
So this is good. This means that I've now gotten over 50% of the TLE crew on my podcast. Very excited about that. I'm looking for the full
left?
set.
Pause.
No, I had pause like a year and a half before I ever even realized TLE was a podcast. And the way he described TLE sounded like the most boring thing in the world. He was like, yeah, it's a news podcast where a bunch of post-libertarians talk about current happenings.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh, wow, that sounds horrible. And so I just was like, yeah, that's interesting, dude. And never looked it up. And then a friend of mine.
And who could blame you?
And then a friend of mine.
We'll keep him away from the marketing department.
It was a technically accurate description.
Yeah.
But then one of my friends locally sent me the episode where you guys covered that dolphin shooting in Miami. Where a dolphin washed up with a bunch of 40 caliber slugs in it. And at that point I was like, all right, this is funny. And yeah, that's when I started talking to Bird, and eventually got you on. But yeah. So in a weird way, I've been working on this collection for quite some time, even if I didn't know it.
Yeah, so you got a Car Campit left.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if he wants to come on my show. Every time I come on TLE, I think I just call him geriatric for an hour and a half until he gets mad.
That's how you get him. he loves being nagged.
Well, that's the thing that I appreciate about TLE is that you have cultivated the same disdain for your audience that I have for mine. Where you harass and belittle, just really cultivate a sense of unease. And that's what I realized it was kindred spirits in the podcasting world.
Well, we're structured like a corporation with a board, and the audience is the board. So we give them the illusion that they have any control whatsoever, and from there we pretty much have them for life. Like, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, see, you have found out something I haven't, which is how to monetize your chemically dependent schizos. I just get called gay on the internet. And I receive really no financial compensation for it. It's not a good strategy.
Well, first they mock you.
Yeah, man. We were talking about this before we went live, but it's funny how long it took us to actually have a conversation, because you and I have been in the same circles for a long time. We were talking about how, even before I started a podcast, I was listening to, your appearances on Pete. And so, I'm glad to finally, make your acquaintance formally, I guess. But, in case that our viewers aren't rabid TLE fans, could you just describe, what you do on the internet?
So what I do on the internet is very different from what my co-hosts do. What I do is I try to make the timeline on X as toxic of a place as possible.
And I appreciate that.
That has been my praxis for going on 5 years now. And it just little drops in the bucket that I can add. As far as the podcast goes, that's really just my vessel of of launching into infamy.
Yeah, see, this is another thing we have in common, because I have two games that I love playing. One, the no context retweet, right? Where I find the most heinous trash I can and just hit that button.
Yes,
and
amplify.
So, exactly. And so if you go through my mentions, roughly every day or two, it's someone saying, why is this on my timeline? oh, it's you. And every time I'm like, yes, it is me. And you're still here.
So before this election cycle, one of the things I used to like to do, and I'd like to get back into eventually, is I was a connoisseur of the fringes, and me and Pete Quinones kind of arrived at the same conclusion, but in parallel, without ever talking about it, and that was that libertarianism is a dead end. It's hit maximum atrophy, and it's time to go somewhere else. So we both started exploring these alternate ideologies, and one of them was Marxist Leninism. And literally, me and Pete at the same time were reading Lenin and kind of gathering from State and Revolution little tidbits of useful praxis that we could, and then applying it to where we were at the time, which was kind of the beginning of the height of COVID. And it ended up blossoming into just this awesome series, and personal growth too, that I still to this day kind of incorporate into, you know, again, what my little drops in the bucket can be in terms of my online activity in
Well,
service to radicalization.
well, this is actually something that, because I listened through that series and it was quite impactful on me as well. Because, at a certain point, right, game has to recognize game. And, you and I are not Marxist Leninists, right? But we have, shall we say, a similar degree of discontent with our current arrangement of power. I'll leave it at that. That's probably purposefully vague enough for YouTube. And so at a certain point, you're like, well, okay, how have people successfully made a change on the order of magnitude of the change that I want to make? And, Lenin is certainly one side of that coin, right? I've been reading through the most famous book by a certain famous Austrian artist, right? And, the back 4 chapters of that are a very similar, it's basically a manual, right? A manual for a revolutionary right. And this is something that actually came up in a conversation with a friend of mine, Stormy Waters. And, he was saying something that I had kind of intuitively felt. I could, feel the vibration, say what you will. That is the next 4 years for us, right? Our praxis of, shitting up the timeline is really not best directed at the libtard right now. Our target is milquetoast conservatives.
Yes.
And this is something that I mentioned, when you and I were talking behind the paywall on your show. But you've seen that, more and more. I always talk about James Lindsay because I think he's the funniest man in the world. And if you've noticed, he's been going on and going on about the so-called woke right. Basically saying it's kind of this like giga horseshoe theory. And what's interesting about that is he is extremely well connected to Conservatism Inc., right? He gets a ton of money from all of the organizations that you're thinking of, including, right, Zionist groups, but also connected to like the anti-communist Chinese diaspora, right? Like the same people who fund the Epoch Times and stuff like that, which is super weird. But yeah, these guys are gunning for us, like explicitly saying like, the so-called woke right is a bigger threat than the woke left. And I mean, look, if they've realized it, we better realize it. And I'm a huge fan of this because all of these guys are massive dorks and they have dumb arguments. And like, look, you and I have basically been in like a gladiator school, right? Like a ghetto school for people having autistic arguments, like crammed up for like 8 years. And so it's basically like, it's like some guy deciding, I think I should probably start going to the gym, picking a fight with Mike Tyson. And it's like, okay, dude, like, fine, let's do it. So sorry, I threw a lot at you there, but you think that's an accurate assessment?
No, I think you're right. Where I would kind of veer off from you is, I don't think it would be a good idea to totally ignore the left. They are not defeated permanently, and I think that has to be a victory condition. But what we can do, and coming full circle back to Lenin, if you think about it, we have all of these newfound benefactors that helped get Trump elected. They are, um, however you want to define it, like the Thiel Consortium or big tech, um, you know, big tech Bappists, or however you want to say it. But these are very rich people with a lot of resources, and I don't think it would be unfair to say that controlling the opposition would be too heavy of a lift for them. And I think it would be a grave mistake to let the Democratic Party moderate.
I completely agree. Now, here's what I'll say. I don't know if I see that happening.
I don't either. It's pie in the sky, wishful thinking. I wish I had 2 million followers and $30 million in the bank, but unfortunately, it's just me. But
Well,
man,
it could happen, right? The idea of the Democrats moderating, right? If you were in charge of Evil Incorporated, right, you could pull all the strings and you wanted to be in charge and like siphon adrenochrome, that's the move you would make, right? But to me, it seems like, I don't know. I think that they have sort of painted themselves in a corner. And you see this in the way that people are talking about, the Trump victory, right? Well, certainly, there's much less of the like, visible, like writhing around on the floor, although some, libtards have shaved their heads. But a lot of it is basically pure cope. It's like Kamala was too good. We didn't run hard enough, to the left. And obviously, who knows if that's just a way to get clicks or if that's a legitimate signal. But I think at this point, we're seeing almost no signaling towards the Democrats, right? Like we're not getting these big pushes like we were during 2020. And so at this point, I think that and this holds for Trump as well, we're kind of in a holding pattern. And this is why I think, because I've talked about nothing but the election, I'm kind of fucking sick of it, is basically it's like at this point, nobody knows. Nobody knows. It's like we're at the Vatican waiting to see, which color of smoke is going to be released out of the chimney. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can guess, but at best it's a guess.
I think the Democrats have to run a handsome white guy for 2028. I think that's the corner they painted themselves in, and I think they cannot be allowed to do that. I think, your last episode, talking about that interview with Pelosi and how they really would have liked to have ran some type of primary process, but Joe Biden half an hour later endorsed Kamala, and there was no way that they were going to put up a white guy when Kamala had already been endorsed. And to me, that's a template of how to operate, how to hack them.
Yeah, I think that you're onto something. Actually, this is what's happened to the Conservative Party in the UK, right? Where they're out of power. They were handed kind of a similar defeat, and yet at the same time, Keir Starmer, which is a very difficult name to say, he is historically unpopular. And in the face of that, right, what have the Conservatives done? Well, they've just run a Nigerian woman who, let me pull up her name, by the way.
I haven't looked into too deep to this, but I have been seeing it cross the timeline.
Okay.
It's hilarious.
Here is her full name. Olukemi Olufunto Adegoke Badenoch.
All right.
Is now the leader of the Conservative Party. So they're not. I mean,
sounds like she might be from Manchester.
She is. Yeah. Sure. Her grandfather fought at Normandy. But anyway, right. And I realize it's not quite as clean because we're talking about the Democrats versus the Conservatives, although the Conservatives are literally the gayest political party in the world.
Oh, yeah.
But again, like it seems like for at least some of these groups, they are literally unable to make the politically rational choice, even at the expense of their own power. Now, one problem with this, I think, is it's hard to determine how much of this is a failure of Democrat ideology and how much of this is a failure of Kamala Harris as a person, which is why I wonder, I think that she and Walz will be scapegoated and no changes will be made. Because let's be honest, that might just be the problem.
We can hope so. I hope that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think we'll see how once the emotions kind of clear, Walz and Harris are treated. But I mean, one, neither of them is going to have a political career after this, and
Oh,
two,
absolutely.
I would be shocked if we don't see them coming out as like the the people to blame for another 4 years of Cheeto Hitler.
Oh yeah. No, then that's already happening. You're starting to see that from some of the policy walks on MSNBC and CNN. They're getting a little uppity now, where they're willing to start criticizing the campaign and how it was ran, and they're still getting shouted down by their co-hosts. But I mean, you're starting to see that. What I fear is Blue Caesar in 2028 surrounding himself with actual competent people, actual political operatives. Um, and that would actually be a race.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the open question is Gavin Newsom, right?
Hmm.
He's been kind of making overtures. He's a good-looking white guy married to a biological woman, which is vanishingly rare in that side of things. So yeah, I mean, he'd certainly be one to watch. I mean, I think that if we're forecasting this 4 years into the future, I think that there's a number of people we can imagine running. I mean, I think
Absolutely.
Gretchen Whitmer is going to run, and I hate her a lot, and not just because she's a woman, although that is a part of it. Josh Shapiro, who I also dislike for several reasons. So it'll be a contested field. I mean, honestly, like I said, if I were in charge of the Democrats, that's what I would do. But it does seem as if they're not at all in the stage of grief where they're accepting responsibility. And I mean, look, like you have an ideology basically built around the refusal to accept responsibility. So it'll be funny to watch.
Oh yeah. And
Good,
the best
good for the
part is,
show, one might say.
yep, it will be. And the best part is that the only thing holding together that coalition of young leftists and old liberals is Trump. And Trump is going to be off the board. I don't know if whoever his successor is going to be a good enough proxy to rally around. But that coalition is on its last legs.
Oh yeah, no, very, very clearly. This is actually one of the things that I think is in all of this been the most impactful, right? Is the October 7th attacks, for a number of reasons.
My 9/11.
My 9/11 was 9/11, but yours is pretty good too. But in all seriousness, right? That kind of struck a blow at the heart of that coalition between the old liberals, who are, shall we say, favorable to sympathetic to Israel, right, and the young leftists. I mean, this is what you saw in the whole Claudine Gay story, right? That effectively the old liberals, right, the people who control the money at a place like Harvard, basically said, get rid of this woman right now. We're pulling our money or else. And so, look, like the activist left has kind of been gone for the last couple of years. Like we really haven't seen them. They're not at all present now. But it remains to be seen if they will come back, or if they are completely and totally like a golem, or like a creature of the money, because that's another possibility, right? That kind of activist left never could have existed on its own. What do you think about that, Aaron?
Yeah, it puzzled me that they pretty much sat out this entire election cycle. Like where were the dysgenic Antifa activists, protesting and punching in the streets? Did they expend all their energy and money in the pro-Palestine protests? Like it blew my mind how absent they were.
Well, honestly, I think part of that was 100% that, but also remember how much they were enabled by law enforcement, right? Like you've got cops kneeling down in front of them, Trump refusing to send in the National Guard. And all of a sudden, if you realize, like, wait a minute, they can send in the mounted police to start clubbing heads. That, I imagine, that cools the enthusiasm very, very quickly, right?
Oh yeah, and I don't think we'll be seeing much of them during this administration, because I think part of his mandate is to bring order to the streets. and they're acutely aware of that.
Yeah, it's that's sort of the thing that will be interesting to see, right? What will be the vector of attack during Trump's presidency? Because I think all of the like Blue Anon tier, Russiagate, the piss tape, all of that stuff, which was pretty obviously fake. I think that doesn't really hold water anymore because he has a mandate, right? He won everything. He won big. He defeated all comers. And I mean, even then, outside of, very lib sources, like who even remembers the Steele dossier, right? Like that's old news. And so I think that, if anything, I would be perhaps most prepared for another George Floyd as the inciting incident. But to be honest, like energy on that side seems so low. I think it'll take them a while to build back up to it.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time you heard about Black Lives Matter? Have they not just expended all of their credibility?
There was some lady that got shot not that long ago. She was like some Asian dude captor. She was like reaching out the door with a knife.
Yeah, the Georgetown. Yeah, she was like a Georgetown basketball player.
Yeah, quite literally the most justified shooting in history, right? Where it's like, it's all POC, as the kids say. He's literally saying for like 6 minutes, stop running at me with a knife or I will shoot you.
Body cameras turned out to be their golem.
Which, by the way, I will say, there's been no greater judo throw on behalf of the police than getting libtards to support body cameras. Because not only is it some of the best viewing material on YouTube, police activity, absolute content goldmine. You can see the wildest shit you've ever heard of happen like 3 times a day. It's the best thing on the internet.
I can be vindicated 3 times a day.
Dude, the comments on those videos, by the way, wild. Like it is. It is wild in there. Like my favorite one is it'll just be like usual suspects just on every single one.
Oh yeah. And like, are you on TikTok? Because I'm not. I'm a little. All right.
Well, I am also too old.
All right. Excellent. But I'm the oldest of 6 half siblings, ranging in ages from 19 to 30. So a lot of my younger siblings are on TikTok. Even my wife is on TikTok, which I argue with her about. But even they're starting to see like body camera footage. Do you remember what was it, World Star? Like the fight videos. Yeah. So TikTok has been, I think, one of the major agents of radicalization for this election cycle as well.
Well, I mean, you even saw that with, the Hamas stuff, like all of that, or the Gaza stuff, where it was like all of those bills that came out about, preventing the Chinese from controlling our elections. And then it turns out, what are they really mad about? It's like Hamas propaganda and then literal unedited videos of what the IDF is doing,
Yeah. Yep.
The best propaganda ever next to the translate from Hebrew button on Twitter, right? Or it's like, I mean, I think that fight exists there for a reason. I mean, again, I'm not on TikTok. I don't really understand it per se. It kind of, it feels like I'm like overstimulated when I use it. Like I feel like my mom playing video games where I'm like, there's just too much information.
Yeah.
I basically, this is a long way to say I am getting old, right? It's over. But yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. And one of the most interesting stories to come out from this election, and this is something that I have been talking about for a long time, but I never had data to back up what I was saying, which has admittedly never stopped me before. But, I was anticipating the rise of male right-wing youth culture, because I was seeing it right among my peers, right? I'm in my 20s. And so I was seeing it on the ground and I was sort of waiting for it to matter in an election. And we saw men under 30 swing hard for Trump. And, I think a big part of that, right, is that the kind of like smothering, HR sensibilities, those are not present at all of the parts of the internet where men congregate. And as I'm sure you know, right, like it doesn't take you that long to get from the like mainline channels to like pretty radicalized.
Oh, I've witnessed that pipeline firsthand with a couple of my younger brothers. Ask me, "Hey, have you ever heard about Ben Shapiro?" And then like the next month they'll be like, "Hey, have you ever heard about Steve Bannon?" And then the next month they'll be like, "Hey, have you ever heard about Thomas 777?"
Yeah.
And it's such a joy to watch, and I do my part to kind of shift them in the right direction without coming across as like, propagandizing them.
Well, honestly, the libtards were right, when they were talking about the like libertarian to alt-right pipeline. It's just
Oh yeah.
they were correct, but not morally right. It's like, no, you're identifying something that is happening. You're wrong that it's a bad thing.
And I think a lot of people my age, like in their 30s, that started off as libertarians, capital L libertarians. My girlfriend at the time volunteered for Gary Johnson's campaign, and I wasn't thrilled about him, but like, I was a capital L libertarian for a while. And the best part about this Gen Alpha and Gen Z is that they are skipping that process entirely and just drinking from the fire hose right off the bat.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, look, hello, nice to meet you. It's me, the radicalized Gen Z guy. But yeah, no, I see it all the time. And, even it's funny. I was talking about police activity, but, I have a somewhat macabre Sunday afternoon ritual where I go to one of my friend's house who lives like, a block away from where I go to church. And we just kind of like, hang out, drink a beer and watch the week's police shootings. And after about like 3 months, he's like, you start to notice some patterns. And I'm like, yep.
You sure do.
You sure do. And, that's kind of a dumb example, but like, I think that the kind of like liberal progressivism that really like ruled the roost for so long that you see just like buried in the like the boomer generation, that required so much positive pressure to keep going, right? That required complete and total control of media, of pop culture, like anything you can think of. And, the internet has degraded the ability to do that. And the people who had, shall we say, control of legacy media, right, who held on to those reins of power, didn't adapt quickly enough. And they lost the new high ground, right? It's similar to like, okay, sure, everyone made fun of Trump for for Space Force, but like, you don't want to be the last guy with a Space Force, similarly to like, imagine fighting World War II without an Air Force, right? And so the internet kind of did that. And, less so, obviously it has gotten more commercialized, but the culture of the internet at large is right wing. And you see that in the kind of memes. Cause look, I know you're in a lot of like, group chats with Groypers and a lot of young guys. And like that humor is not progressive at all. And like, that's kind of a stupid, it doesn't, make it into an effective political force, but it does show you that like there's control is, there's extreme demand for that.
Yep. And the funny thing about Groypers is as feral and just as feral, I'm trying to be nice, but they are feral and directionless. But what I have learned about them is that they are supremely self-aware. Like they know that they are natural slaves. And they won't even argue with you about that. They also recognize, and I find this interesting, they recognize that they have very little hope of ever doing the normal things that American men start building a foundation for in their 20s, like getting a girlfriend, getting a job that inevitably points to a career. They don't do any of that. One of them put it pretty succinctly. He was like, when you're a soldier, you have to accept the fact that you're already dead. And it kind of blew my mind. Like that is literally their mindset. They are acutely aware of their position.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, the libtards really did this to themselves. Because, I was even talking to my wife about this where it was like, we were talking about going to school in the kind of mid 2000s, right? And the thing we were talking about is like, it really was as close to a society where race was not an issue as possible, right? And I don't mean in the like macro sense, but everyone from, practically every group was on some sort of the same page of like, okay, these are things you just don't talk about, like this is considered culturally inappropriate to, joke about or to point out. And it wasn't organic, but it was polite, right? And then, Obama comes into office and, sorry, my voice message in my right-wing bodybuilding group just went off. That's not a joke, by the way. Anyway, but, then you have Obama come in, this kind of like savior of the libtard religion. And, instead of quote unquote healing the nation from racism, if you even believe such a thing is possible, what does he start doing? He starts beating the drum, just beating the drum to get more support, to raise the temperature because it got him more power. And I mean, the things that, happened with the start of BLM, kind of like under his tenure, it's like they really created that monster and it served them, but that is creating a backlash, right? There's an equal and opposite reaction. And when you take a generation of people who, maybe were not raised to really consider, racial identity to be something important in their life and said, you were bad and wrong because of your race, after 10 years, you've got a whole bunch of guys who are like, oh, I'm a Nazi. So what?
Yeah. Yep. And I witnessed that happen firsthand. I was in the Navy from 2010 to 2019. I mean, pretty much almost the entirety of the Obama years and a little bit of Trump.
So question, which is gayer, being in the Navy or being a libertarian?
Oh man, that's a good question. Functionally, being in the Navy.
I appreciate your honesty.
Physically, being in the Navy.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, but I mean, I was in when they repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell back in 2012, and I think that's where I would pinpoint the shift. There was definitely a change in the air where all of a sudden these groups of people that we couldn't really articulate why they were freaks, but we just thought that they were gay guys, and man, like that's when you started hearing words like transgender, like polyamorous, like all these vocabulary words came into the zeitgeist. And the worst part is like, what can you say to them when you're talking about like Obama enabling all that? Our choice was John McCain. So it's like we didn't have the language to resist this at the time. And I think a lot of undue hate is placed on millennials, which most of it's deserved. But you have to remember that people my age that have our line of thinking, we didn't have the language to resist for probably about 10 years.
Yeah, and look, millennials are probably my favorite punching bag. I'll be honest; it's just so
rightfully
easy,
so.
But there really is something to that, right? And I think it's why so many of those guys ended up as libertarians, because you come to the realization, you're like, okay, well, I'm not liberal. I don't like that, but my alternative is John McCain, and I also hate that. So what is the third option, right? If you ask anyone, what is the third party? It's the Libertarian
That's exactly
Party.
how it happens. I'm not definitely not a Democrat, but I'm also not really a Republican. Well, here's what was his name? Bob, the guy before Gary Johnson. Bob something, but Gary Johnson, say.
Yeah, who's, kind of dumb, but he probably wouldn't bomb 1 million children. Which is like a pretty low bar to clear, but at least he gets that one. He may not know where Aleppo is, but
Oh man, and so we were really pigeonholed into, either being a libertarian if you kind of naturally already leaned right, And then, being an Obama Democrat, which was richly rewarding, especially when you incorporate that into, how you do your job in the military.
No, 100%. Like this is actually, I was talking to, the guy who teaches jujitsu at the gym I go to, and what he was saying is he's in his mid 40s, just found out he's going to be a grandpa, right? So he was in kind of a reflective mood, and he was talking about having kids in the kind of like early Bush era, right? This like insane patriotism. And, one of the things he was talking about is it's just like, for a lot of especially young people, you're not really primed to dig that deep, right? You're like, well, I want to be rebellious. What is rebellious? And you have, a whole kind of like cultural movement set up to feed rebellion to you, right? This is in, Kaczynski's The System's Greatest Trick, right? And that rebellion basically feeds into the system, right? It turns you into a warrior to make the system more efficient. And so, he was talking about coming out of it, right? Realizing that later in life. And then seeing his son, who's, about my age now, right? How differently he viewed the world, because at the point where he was a young man, right? That kind of pre-canned rebellion had been revealed as completely and totally false. And so like as much shit as we have to give the millennials, and we do have to make fun of them more, you sort of can't blame them for the conclusions they came to at the time, right? That seemed to be a logical choice.
Oh yeah. And going back to the Groypers, that's another motivating factor for them. And also kind of a cage that they put themselves in is intergenerational apathy or antipathy.
Yeah, I know they hate boomers, but who else do they hate?
They hate millennials. They hate millennials more than boomers.
Well, they can't be all bad, I guess. Actually, I don't interact with the Groypers all that much, but every time I do, it's like, and I don't even know why, but it's like I will have done something that displeased them, and then I just get chimped out at for like 2 days for reasons I cannot discern. And then it's like, all right, I guess that's done. It's like, do you ever play the old Zelda games where you'd like hit the chicken and then like chickens would like fly across the whole screen and like kill you or whatever? It's like,
yeah.
It's just like a swarm, but it's not even like it's discernible why it happens. It's just like the rain.
No, it's completely, they're completely feral, and they're an amalgamous blob, and you never know. But for me, in order to gain their trust and like kind of let them smell my hand like you would an animal, what I appealed to was they're Catholic integralists, and they're also race realists. So once you can kind of get them to look past the fact that you're a millennial and that you have like, I had the Dark MAGA PFP. That's another kind of thing that sets them off in the friend enemy distinction. But that's kind of how I got in, was like Catholic integralism and race realism. And then I watched a couple Nick Fuentes streams, and riffed off that a little bit, and now I'm in. And it's not that I like them, I just like to see what everybody's doing. I was in a communist group chat for like 2 years with like hammer and sickle PFPs, talking about, they would talk about the CIA more than like the TLE group chat would.
I'm really curious. One, what motivated you to do that? And two, what did you learn? I mean, obviously you're a scholar of Lenin, but
just curiosity, really. Like, I want to see what these fringes are up to because I'm nosy. I'm a nosy yenta.
All right, fair enough. I can respect that. I like doing that, where I love going kind of behind enemy lines. Like I follow the worst shit libs on the internet. Because I find it funny, and also it helps with, one, the no context retweets, and then two, my other favorite game, which is literally just copy and pasting other people's tweets. And then the more
Oh
like
man.
perfectly calculated they are to set off our guys, the funnier they are. So for instance, right, let's just scroll back on my own timeline. Yeah, here's one day ago. America elected a felon before we elected a woman of color. It's just so insane and backwards. I'm getting ratioed on my own posts. People are just furious, but I can't stop. It's hilarious to me. And also, I will say, there's a serious reason I do it. And it's basically, I never want to let people forget how truly awful our enemies are. Like, I don't
Yes.
want them to get too distracted by, XYZ theory pill or like whatever kind of slop, oh, we made a feminist cry about Trump. That doesn't matter. I want them to see what like. I want them to know. I want to rub their nose in it so they don't forget that they need to hate these people.
Yes. And we need to make this platform as uncomfortable as possible. And I can't say we, because really it's Elon that kind of let this all happen and opened the gates for us. But my thing has always been, do your part to make this platform as undesirable as possible for our enemies. And that's already kind of happening on the shitlib side. But like you said,
that's definitely happening. Like
they're self-deporting. It's
yeah,
great.
Really. You've seen like Don Lemon self-deport. The Guardian's gone. Which admittedly, I'm kind of sad The Guardian is gone because they were funny. So maybe
their
this is
headlines
bad
are
for the show.
amazing.
Yeah. Don Lemon too. But do you remember that stupid stunt Don Lemon pulled? Where like Elon Musk was like, oh, I guess I need to be fair and balanced. So I'll give Don Lemon a paid position at Twitter. And then he like stormed out because not Donald Trump, because Elon Musk wouldn't give him what he wanted. And so Elon just posted his list of demands. And it was like the most outrageous. He's like, I want a personal chef. And like it was like the most like ludicrous list of demands. Yeah, that's fun. I'm gonna miss
I do
that guy.
vaguely remember that.
That's my my secret ability on the right wing internet is remembering stupid news stories no one else cares about from like 2 to 3 years ago.
That's another well, no, that's actually a very good skill to have, because I find that I am a victim of the news cycle. Like I should be able to capture it. Like all the guest appearances I've had on Pete, I think I could probably name right now maybe 3. But I know that I've had like 10.
I get that. Well, especially like this will happen where someone will like post a quote that I said, and I'll look at it and be like, to be honest, that doesn't sound like me. Sounds a little too smart, but I'll take it. Yeah, I said that. That sounds smart. Yeah, that was definitely me. Because if you just talk enough on the internet, you completely lose track of it. And so the alternative of that is someone's like, you said this 2 years ago and you were wrong. And I'm like, 1, I don't remember. 2, that's a very long list. And 3, I guess I'm sorry or I'm not, depending. I don't know.
I'm glad somebody's keeping track.
Yeah, because it's certainly not me.
Oh man. Yeah, I got people in my group chat that are like, they'll quote something from like a TLE episode from like 3 years ago. And I'm like, oh, haha, which co-host said that? They're like, you motherfucker. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other funny thing. And because I've been going to more of these IRL meetups, is you get to see the other side of the parasocial relationship.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very flattering and cool, but every once in a while it's a little weird. Like I was in a conversation where the punchline was basically, this guy falls asleep to my podcast every night. And so he like hears my voice in his dreams. And I'm like, I mean, that's kind of cool. That's also a little weird when you say it like that. Like you should not grant me that much access to your mind. I say really dumb stuff on the internet.
Yeah, I got a taste of that a few years ago. I went to that Pork Fest, which is like a libertarian festival.
You catch a disease? Because all I hear is people getting like, I don't know, like frankenchlamydia or whatever.
No, I was there the year that everybody caught COVID.
Oh, sorry, I can't keep track. There was a year with the STDs, though. I'm right about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I went once and like that was it. That was like the tail end of my libertarian days. Met Pete there, met Tom Woods, a bunch of like a bunch of good people, and also TLE listeners. Like you were saying, it is very disjarring when like a group of people open carrying 3D printed ARs come up and be like, "Oh my god, it's Aaron!" Like, "Oh, I love you." Oh, and then they'll give you like their Twitter handle, and I'm like, "I don't remember you. I'm sorry."
That actually brings up a very important question. Is Tom Woods really that little?
He's a pretty short dude, yeah.
Tragic.
Love him to death, but he's a short dude.
Yeah, he's one of our best. He's a short king.
He is a short king. And Jeffrey Tucker is just as gay as he looks in his pictures.
Answering the important questions.
Yep.
Well, actually, one of the other really weird moments, and this is just pure inside baseball. If I were a listener, I would have clicked out a while ago. But I will say one of the other really weird ones is if no one knows what you look like, but you know each other on the internet. Like when I met Pete, and Pete has my personal phone number. We'll talk every once in a while. He helps me out with podcast stuff. And so like I went up to him the first time and I was like, "Oh, hey Pete, how you doing?" He was like, who are you? Like eventually he got the voice, but at first he was very like, this is much too friendly. You don't know me.
I'll randomly call Pete when I'm driving, like at night. Cause I drive a lot for work. I'm in real estate development.
Oh, same.
So
how much is your average mileage a month? Cause I probably have you beat.
Let's see. I've been doing it for 3 years. My car's a 2020 and I'm already at 100,000.
Oh, amateur hour. I did, I just got laid off, but my last month I did 5,200 miles in a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is pretty good.
Yeah. Sorry. Back to your story. I'm just trying to dick measure how much you can drive into on a
I'm going to start tracking it now.
Your brains out. Yeah. The answer is, at least long enough to get fired.
Yeah. Yep. But no, like, so I drive around a lot and, so I'll call Pete randomly, like when I have what I think is an original thought. And like, I want to run it by him first. And it turns out that like, oh, this is something he's already had like multiple episodes on. One of them was, and actually I'd love to pick your brain on it is, you're starting to see this, separation between, like Baptists and Catholic, I guess you'd call them Christian nationalists, on the right. I mean, we kind of had our own little coalition for the election season. And, I forget I forget how to articulate it, but it was like, I foresaw like a civil war happening. When push comes to shove and somebody is going to get shoved out of this coalition and, it's between the BAP right and Christian nationalists or Catholic integralists or however you want to describe them. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I've been thinking about that too. It's going to be terrible."
So here's my thought on this. I don't listen to BAP, but I've listened to him a few times, and I think he's generally an interesting guy with some original ideas. Now, here's what I will say. I think that sort of pagan vitalism is much less native to the right wing, right? Like it has a hedonist string to it. And the problem is, and I this was actually the conversation that kicked off the Jay Burden show, is that a conversation with a guy who at the time was, interested in those ideas. And we had a really long, productive discussion / argument for a couple hours. And one of the things that I brought up in that, and, he and I are still friends. He's, kind of no longer flirting with these ideas, but was, look, like, okay, if this kind of like pagan vitalism, right? This warrior band is what you want. Well, let's look at current American society where those virtues are practiced. I present to you the ghetto, right? Like that, there it is. Do you want to live like that? Like, really, do you want to live like that? And so I think that sort of attitude is, and not in all cases, but less less connected. And look, I'm not a Christian nationalist. I'm a very much a right-wing Christian, and I like a lot of those guys, but that's not my camp, right? I think about things really differently. And I think that that group has been around the right in different forms for a very, very long time. Look at Father Coughlin. Admittedly, he was Catholic, right? But look, like that's a similar tendency, right? Just expressed slightly differently. Look at the paleo conservatives. That is a long running. That's Lindy, so to speak, on the right. So I don't really have a dog in this fight. I have more friends on one side than others. But again, if you're going to make a bet, the thing that's been around longer is probably your best bet for which one is going to survive. So that's my thought on that. I actually go to the point where I don't even really consider the Vitalists to be meaningfully right wing. I think they are anti-progressive. But yeah, so sorry, maybe that's a long, rambly way of answering your question. But I think in that fight, the Christians win.
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking about. Like, what is the future of the right wing? More so than what is the future of the left wing, because that to me is just a passing interest. But I am a man of the right, and I have kind of embedded myself into this, for better or worse, this, you know, Catholic integralist tendency that I'd like to do my part to kind of spread.
Well, see, I'm what I refer to myself as a deeply, deeply closeted Catholic, which means I'm not Catholic and will never admit it. But anyway, maybe that's a discussion for another time. Yeah, I mean, here's what I will say. I think that Catholic integralism is sort of alien to America. And so I say this as someone who is generally sympathetic to Catholics, but I think that the kind of like E. Michael Jones tier stuff is very, very off-putting, and not just because of his
voice
and habitual targets.
Yeah.
Right? Like when he's talking about like Hispanics as the star children and stuff, it's like, all right, dude, this is a little weird for me. And I really like his books. Like I think Libido Dominandi is quite good. Actually, speaking of a harsh difference between them and the Vitalists, that book is a pretty good example. But yeah, I don't know. E. Michael Jones is a fun. I'll put it this way: I don't ever want to meet him because I think he'd hate me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel exactly the same way. And his you have to let him marinate when he makes a point, like when he was like railing against gun culture. Like my first reaction was like, okay, well he's just wrong and dumb and he's a boomer. But it wasn't until like literally a month and a half later when he was calmly explaining it to a guest on his show, like what he was talking about. And it was like, the gun kind of replaced the communal spirit. When Americans went to the West and they took their gun and that was their safety. And that kind of flies in the face of the Catholic tradition of having community and spirit and all that, where having a gun isn't really a big deal one way or the other. And so that kind of I had to marinate on it, I guess, to figure out where he was coming from. And I find that I do that a lot. And I don't want you to think that I'm like a hardcore Catholic integralist. It's just it's my newest fascination.
Well, I'll put it this way. Get enough drinks in me and I might be a hardcore Catholic integralist. Who knows? I read enough Joseph de Maistre.
Yeah.
Anyway, man, this has been a really fun conversation about, I guess, nothing in particular.
Nope, nothing. My favorite.
I have to do these. Like, it's the reason I keep having Bird on every month or so, because, look, sometimes it just gets a bit much. You're like, yep. Do I have to talk about these, adrenochrome huffing Satanists one more time? I'm going to lose it. So instead, I'm going to make dick jokes on the internet for 90 minutes.
We talked about this before we hit record, and like I was scrolling through your episode lists and looking at your guests, and I'm like, there's no possible way I have anything to offer. I, a retard, have nothing interesting to say in comparison to any of your other episodes, except maybe birds.
Well, you know what, Aaron? I think I agree with your point there. This was a total waste of fucking time.
Glad I could help. Hey, blow off some steam. That's what I'm here for.
Well, anyway, man, if people want to find more of your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
You can find me on the Timeline Earth podcast, and you can pay for the Linear Mail podcast on Patreon. Yeah, I'm just chugging away in my crystal. I don't know when I don't know when I'll be released. I've heard 400,000 years. I've heard next month.
Well, I'll put it this way: as your replacement on TLE officially, I hope they keep you in the crystal for a while, just so I can really break out. As far as my stuff, you can find the Jay Burden Show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support us, you can send me your crypto, because if you don't, I'll do something drastic and you will be responsible for it. Or you can head over to our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. JD's a personal friend. He's my only sponsor because he's the only person I think is worth letting me sponsor the show. And really happy with the group of guys we've got built up over there. Again, Aaron, thanks for coming on, and everyone at home, keep your head up. The light can't last forever.